All right, hi everybody. This is Mr. Manning, and this video is going to be about some design tips that you can use whenever you are creating a digital presentation. So I want you to take a second. You might even want to pause the video to do this, but I want you to think a little bit about what are some things that absolutely drive you crazy whenever you are watching somebody else present a PowerPoint or any digital presentation. I know some things that drive me crazy are when um, the person puts way too much on the slide. Maybe you said that one. I also think it drives me crazy whenever somebody reads to me instead of just talk about the info that's up there. That makes them look kind of like they're not really prepared. I don't like it when there's a whole bunch of like silly animations or the person chooses a font style that doesn't make it easy to read. So there's probably a lot of things, especially if you're a student. You get to see presentations a lot, so they might really drive you crazy. So what we're going to talk about today is how to do some things that would help your presentations be a little bit more, a little bit better for your audience, and how to make them a little bit more visually appealing. So if you think to yourself, what is the purpose of a digital presentation? And a lot of times people create these things and they think that the reason I'm creating this is so that the audience can get all the information they need. And that's actually not true. The digital presentation is supposed to act as a visual aid for your oral presentation. And what I mean by that is when you are presenting to somebody, an audience, that visual presentation is going to be most likely behind you or somewhere where the audience can see it. And you're also talking or telling them about the information that's on those slides. So you don't want to include so much that it is like able to replace you, the presenter. But you also want to put enough on the slides so that your audience can follow along and can get some of the key information. All right. So we're going to talk about some things that you should and should not do. And to help you along with this, I have provided this table. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tips that we're going to discuss. And for each one, we're going to talk about what you should do and what you should not do. All right, so first let's talk about balance. And when I say balance, I'm talking about the things that you put on the slide. And there's really a couple of different types of balance. So one of the types of balance is where you place things. And the other type of balance is what you decide to place on the slide, because you have complete control over what goes on the slide of the presentation you're creating. So let's talk about what you decide to put on there. There should be a pretty good mix of text and graphics. And what I mean by that is you don't want to have a slide that's only words, and you also don't want to have a slide that's only pictures. Now, I guess there could probably be some exceptions to the pictures rule. Maybe there is something that you're going to talk about that you have a few photos that go along with it. And as long as you're planning on talking about those photos while they're on the screen, then that's totally fine. But you really just can't show an audience a bunch of photos and expect them to understand the message behind those photos. So that's why you might need some text to go along with it. Another thing is where you decide to place those things. You don't want to like overload your slides. You don't want to have too much on the left or too much on the right. You don't want to have everything at the top or everything at the bottom. You should try to, evenly spread out the pictures and the graphics. So here is an example of a poor slide. This isn't a very well designed slide. And one reason is because all of the information is on the left side. There is absolutely nothing over here on the right. In fact, if I was an audience member and I was watching this presentation, I probably would be thinking about, I wonder what is going to come up over here. Like I would almost be anticipating seeing a photo or a graph or a chart or something. But at the moment, there's nothing there, so this slide looks unbalanced. It's also kind of unbalanced because there's only text, there's no photos. And I do know that with this design that I'm using, there's like this little, kind of swirly design back here, and that sort of counts, but it would be better if you had some sort of photo to help balance this slide. Okay. The next thing is about fonts. What types of fonts you should and should not use. So these are fonts you should not use. You do not want cursive or handwritten looking fonts. They're difficult to read. You also don't want cutesy little fonts like this one that has all sorts of little swirlies at the end of each letter. Those just don't look very professional. Your audience will probably become a little distracted, maybe even a little annoyed by it. If you choose a font that has a bold appearance to it, that can sometimes work well with presentations, especially if you're going to have slides that don't have a lot of words on them. Bold fonts can be easier to read. You have to imagine, where are you presenting at? Is the room really large? Or are there going to be people that are really far away from the screen? And then one thing, and this is kind of a personal thing that I like to bring up, is not every computer has the same fonts. There was one time where I put together a presentation. I was actually presenting to a pretty large audience. I think there was going to be about 80 or 90 people in the room. And I put together this presentation that I had worked a really long time on. I wanted it to be perfect. And it never dawned on me that the font that I was using might not be on the computer that I would be using at the place I was giving the presentation at. So the day of the presentation, I showed up and I had this beautiful, beautiful presentation, and I loaded it on the computer and it looked totally different than what I had created. And I realized that the computer had changed my fonts to something else. And what it had changed it to was not good. I didn't like it at all. So I had to spend a little bit of time trying to fix that, and I was really nervous because I was about to present in front of almost 100 people. It just wasn't a very good feeling. So try to pick a font that you're almost certain every computer is going to have. All right, a little bit more about fonts. You don't want to have too many fonts, too many different types of fonts on one slide. Usually 2 is plenty. You could have a font style for your titles, and then a font style for all of the text or the body. Besides that, 2 is good. And then this is a big pet peeve of mine, probably one of yours too. Do not put text across a photo. Just drives me crazy whenever I see a presentation and there is text that goes across a photo. The text gets lost. It's hard to read. If you're going to do that, you have to do some graphic design stuff with either the photo or the text to make it more readable. And if you don't have the knowledge to do those kinds of things, then just avoid it. Have your text in one spot, your photo in another spot. So here's another terrible example. There's way too many fonts. I misspelled the word "to," which is another thing. Make sure your spelling and your grammar is correct. I've got a cursive handwritten looking font here. It goes across this photo. Just overall really bad. So don't create a slide like this one. All right, next tip is about colors. So when you are choosing a presentation, you're going to most likely have a background. And that background is either going to be a light color or a dark color. The one that I'm using right now is a dark color. It's almost all black except for down here in the corner. It's kind of a dark blue. Depending on what your background color is going to tell you what your text should be. So if you have a dark background, have a light colored text, and vice versa. If your background is light, have a dark colored text. You want to have high contrast. If you don't have high contrast, it's going to be difficult to read. And think about those people way in the back that can't see it very well, and now you're making it even tougher on them. Now I don't want to get into a lot of design theory and stuff, but you might think about what colors look good together. A color wheel can help you do that. And here are some good and bad of colors that look good and don't look good together. And then I have a little saying, say no to the rainbow. And basically what that means is don't have too many colors in your background. A rainbow slide is almost never a good design choice. So I would choose backgrounds that have just solid or pretty close to being solid colors, so that you can easily put text and other things on top of them, and your audience will be able to easily see them. You're probably thinking to yourself, gosh, this is really boring, Mr. Manning. You're asking us to do presentations that are incredibly boring. Yeah, you know what? They might be a little boring, but your audience doesn't want to see rainbow backgrounds and things spinning around in cutesy fonts. They want to get the information that you're talking about. They don't want to see all that extra stuff on your slides. All right, another terrible design for multiple reasons. So we've got this horrendous rainbow background. We have text that gets totally lost right here in the middle. We've got a bad example and a good example of what colors to choose. Okay, overcrowding. Gosh, this is the one that probably most students fail at. And I'm guilty of it, and I bet if you were honest with yourself, you'd be guilty of it too. We start to research our topic. We know that we're going to be presenting to somebody. We're going to be sharing our information. And one of two things happens. Either we are really passionate about our topic and we want to share all the information with them, and we just can't decide what to include and what not to include. So we just include it all. Or we are not passionate about our topic and we just want to get this thing done, and we end up copying and pasting. And copying and pasting is never a good idea. So don't put too much words on your slides. You should use short, concise chunks of information, and I would highly recommend using bullets. This is probably one of the only times in your academic careers where it is okay to not use complete sentences. In fact, you shouldn't use complete sentences. So there's this thing called the rule of sevens. On every slide, try not to have more than 7 lines of text, and on each of those lines, try not to have 7 words. Now, I'm not expecting you to count every single word and count every single line, and your audience isn't going to do that either. But it's a general rule of thumb. If you break these rules, your slide is probably going to look a little overcrowded. Here's an example. And I know that all of us have seen slides that look like this. Way, way too crowded. Too much stuff on there. There is absolutely no way that your audience would get any value out of this slide, and you as a presenter are not going to know what to really say. In fact, you're probably going to be tempted to just read this to your audience, and they don't want to hear you read. So this is not a good idea. Okay, just a couple of more. Animations and sound. So PowerPoint, Google Slides, they can do these really fun, cool animations. Sometimes they're appropriate. Sometimes if you want to pace out your presentation, you want to make sure that your audience isn't seeing something too quickly, then having animations are great because you can have things appear on the screen or leave the screen as you're talking about them. But to just have animations for the heck of having animations is not necessary. There's no reason why you need to have something spin around or bounce all over the screen. It's probably not going to add anything to your presentation. So don't do that. Also, it slows you down because you have to sit up there and like click, 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 click. And your audience is probably going to start to get bored and roll their eyes and thinking about, why did this guy put so many animations in their presentation? Same thing with sounds. There are some times where sounds are appropriate, especially if you need to like demonstrate to your audience what something sounds like. But to have just random sounds because they're fun and cool, don't. Don't include those. All right, so this is probably the absolute worst slide I could think of. There are so many things wrong with this slide. There's a terrible background. It's overcrowded. It's unbalanced. There's too many font styles. The text is going across a picture. If I were to put this in motion, some of these things would start to bounce around. It's ridiculous. So don't create anything that looks like this, and follow the 7 rules that we just discussed, and hopefully you have filled out on your table. All right. Thanks, guys.